Gurudevo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasme Sri Gurave Namaha Om Ganana Antva Ganamavamahe Kavin Kavinam Upavashravastramam Jeshtarajam Brahmanaspada Anushrunnoti Viseda Sadhanam Om Mahaganadipata Namaha Om Keshwaya Namaha Om Narayana Namaha Om Madhvaya Namaha Om Govindaya Namaha Om Vishnuve Namaha Matsudraya Namaha Trivikramaయ Namaha Vamanaya Namaha Sridharaya Namaha Veshaya Namaha Padmanabhaya Namaha Damodaraya Namaha Sankarshnaya Namaha Vasudevaya Namaha Pradyumnaya Namaha Niruddhaya Namaha Purushottamaya Namaha Dokshaya Namaha Narasimhaya Namaha Achyutaya Namaha Janama Upendraya Namaha Hare Namaha Sri Krishna Namaha Sri Krishna Namaha Sri Krishna Namaha. Dear friends, we reached the 7th chapter of 11th canto of Bhagavata Purana. In this chapter, Lord Krishna is teaching Uddava. It is also called Uddava Gita. There are so many interesting topics in Uddava Gita, and also it gives an inclination how devotion to Lord Krishna can be increased by various understanding of the principles. Supreme Lord Krishna replied to Uddava's prayerful entreaty that he be allowed to return with him to his abode. Krishna advised Uddava to take to the renounced order of sannyasa, and when Uddava showed interest in more elaborated instructions, Lord Krishna further described the Avadhuta's account of his 28 spiritual masters. After hearing Uddava's prayerful request to be taken back with him to the spiritual world, Lord Krishna informed him that he was indeed desirous of returning to his own personal abode because the purpose of his descent had been successfully fulfilled and the misfortunes of Kali Yuga would soon beset on the earth. He thus advised Uddava to take up sannyasa by fixing his mind upon him and establishing himself in the theoretical and realized transcendental knowledge. The Lord further instructed Uddava that while remaining untouched by the contamination and compassionately disposed to all beings, he should begin wandering throughout this temporary world, which is simply the combined manifestation of the Lord's illusory energy and the imagination of the living entities. Uddava then stated that renouncing the material things in a spirit of the detachment is the source of the highest auspiciousness, but such renunciation is certainly extremely difficult to accomplish for living entities other than the devotees of the Supreme Lord. Because they are very attached to sense gratification, Uddava expressed the need for some instruction by which foolish persons who misidentify the body as the self can be convinced to carry out their duties in accordance with the order of the Supreme Lord. Even great gods like Brahma and Shiva are not completely surrendered to Lord, but Uddava declared that he himself had taken shelter of the only true instructor of the absolute truth, Lord Narayana, the all-perfect, all-knowing master of Vaikuntha, and the only real friend of all living entities. Hearing this, the Supreme Lord replied that actually the Jiva soul is his guru. Within this human body, the living beings can search out the Supreme Lord by positive and negative means and ultimately achieve them. For this reason, the human form of life is most dear to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this regard, Lord Krishna began to describe an ancient conversation between Brahmana, Avadhutha, and the great king Yadhu. The son of Yayati Maharaja Yadhu was encountered an Avadhutha who was traveling about here and there in great transcendental ecstasy and was acting unpredictably, just like someone who has become haunted by a ghost. The king inquired from the holy man about the cause of his wandering and his ecstatic condition, and the Avadhutha replied that he had received various instructions from 24 different gurus: the earth, the wind, the sky, the water, the fire, and so on. Because of the knowledge he had gained from them, he was able to travel about the earth in a liberated state. From the earth, he had learned how to be sober. And from the two manifestations to the earth, namely the mountain and the tree, had learned respectively how to serve others and how to dedicate one's whole life to the benefit of others. From the wind manifesting in the form of vital air within the body, he had learned how to be satisfied with merely keeping oneself alive. And from the external wind, he had learned how to remain uncontaminated by the body and the objects of the senses. From the sky, he had learned how the soul, which pervades all material substances, is both indivisible and imperceptible. And from the water, he had learned how to be naturally clear and purifying. From the fire, he had learned how to devour all the things without becoming dirtied, and how to destroy all the inauspicious desires of those who take offerings to him. He had also learned from from the fire how the spirit of soul enters into everybody and gives illumination, and how the birth or the death of those who are embodied cannot be discerned. From the moon, we had learned how the material body undergoes. From the moon, he had learned how the material body undergoes growth and dwindling. From the sun, he had learned how to avoid entanglement even while coming into contact with sense objects. And he had also learned about the two different modes of perception based on seeing the real form of the soul and seeing false designative coverings. From the pigeon, he had learned how too much affection and excessive attachment are not good for one. This human body is the open door to liberation. But if one becomes attached to the family like life like the pigeon, one is compared to a person who has climbed up to a high place just to fall down again. These are the summary of the seventh chapter. We will read the shlokas and starts with the Bhagavan Vacha, because Lord Krishna is telling Uddava, Edatmanam, Edatmam, Mahabhaga, Tachit Devame Vame, Brahma Bhavo, Lokapalaha, Sarva Samme, Bikakshinaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, says to Uddava, O greatly fortunate Uddava, you have accurately revealed my desire to withdraw the Yadhu dynasty from the earth and return to my own abode in Vaikuntha. Thus, Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and all other planetary rulers are now praying for me to resume my residence in Vaikuntha. Each and every god has his particular abode in heavenly planets within the material universe. Although Lord Vishnu is sometimes counted among the gods, his abode is in Vaikuntha, the spiritual sky. The other gods are universal controller within the kingdom of Maya, but Vishnu is the Lord of illusory potency and many other spiritual potencies. His exalted residence does not lie within the kingdom of his own insignificant maidservant Maya. Lord Vishnu, the personality of Godhead, is the supreme Lord of all lords. The other gods are his separated parts and parcels. Being themselves minute jiva souls, the other gods are under the influence of the potency of Maya. But Lord Vishnu is always the supreme controller of Maya. The personality of Godhead is the reservoir and root of all existence. And the material world is just a dim reflection of the brilliant scenery of his eternal spiritual abode, where everything infinitely beautiful and pleasurable. Vishnu is the supreme reality, and no living entity can ever be equal to or greater than him. The Lord exists within him. The Lord exists within his own unequivocal category called Vishnu Tattva, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vishnu Tattva is important. All other prominent or extraordinary living entities owe their positions and potencies to the Lord. Ultimately, Vishnu himself is the plenary expansion of Lord Krishna, the original source of all Vishnu Tattva and Jiva Tattva expansions. Thus, Lord Krishna is the basis of everything. Maya nishpaditam hatra devakaryamasheshatah yadartamavatirno hamamshena brahmanartitah. Answering the prayer of Lord Brahma, I descended within this world along with my plenary portion, Lord Balarama, and performed various activities on behalf of the gods. I have now completed my mission here in the Bhuloka. Kulam vai shapanirdagham nakrutyonyo na vigrahat samudraha saptame pietam purim chaplada yashyati chaplada chapla chaplava ishyati. Now, due to the Brahmana's curse, the Yadhu dynasty will certainly perish by fighting among themselves. And on the seventh day from today, the ocean will rise up and inundate the city of Dwaraka Nagara. In this and the following verses, Lord Krishna indicates to Uddava that he should immediately fix himself in self-realization by giving up all identification with the material world. Srila Jiva Goswami has pointed out that the Yadhu dynasty was not actually destroyed by Lord Krishna, but merely removed from the vision of the world through the curse of the Brahmanas. Similarly, the Lord's eternal abode, Dwaraka, Nagara, can never be drowned by the ocean. Nevertheless, all external approaches to this transcendental city were covered by the ocean. And thus, the Lord's abode remains inaccessible to foolish persons in Kali Yuga, as will be described later in this canto. By the Lord's mystic potency called Yogamaya, he reveals his own form of abode, paraphernalia, pastimes, entourage, and so on. And at the suitable time, he removes all of these from our mundane sight. Although bewildered conditioned souls may doubt the spiritual potency of the Lord, the pure devotees can directly perceive and relish his transcendental appearance and disappearance, which are described in Bhagavad Gita as Janma Karma Chame Divyam. If one faithfully accepts this perfect knowledge of the Lord's transcendental nature, then surely one will go back to home, back to Godhead, to Vaikuntha Loka, and become one eternal companion of Lord Krishna. O saintly Uddava, in the near future, I will abandon this earth. Then, being overwhelmed by the age of Kali Yuga, the earth will be bereft of all piety. Lord Krishna's plan was to bring Uddava back to his own eternal abode after a brief delay. Because of Uddava's extraordinary spiritual qualities, the Lord wanted to engage him in propagating his messages among other saintly persons who are not yet advanced to the stage of pure devotional service. However, the Lord assured Uddava that he would not be bereft of the Lord's association for even a moment. Also, because Uddava had become a perfect master of his senses, he would never be afflicted by the three modes of material nature. In this way, before bringing Uddava back to Godhead, the Lord empowered him to carry out a specific confidential mission. Wherever the supreme position of the personality of Godhead is not recognized, useless mental speculation becomes very prominent, and the safe and sure path of hearing perfect Vedic knowledge becomes covered by the chaos of mental concoction. At the present time, especially in the Western countries, literally millions of books are being published on hundreds and thousands of subjects. Yet, despite the proliferation of mental concoction, people remain totally in ignorance about the most fundamental issues of human life, namely, who am I? Where I have come from? Where I am going? What is my soul? What is God? The personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, is the reservoir of innumerable enchanting pastimes, and thus he is the source of innumerable varieties of pleasure. In fact, he is the ocean of eternal pleasure. When the eternal soul is bereft of the constitutional pleasure that comes from loving service to the Lord, he is overwhelmed and bewildered by material nature. He helplessly chases after material sense of gratification, thinking that one material object is good and another is bad, and constantly changes his assessment of what is good and what is bad. Thus, he derives no peace or pleasure, is in constant anxiety, and is repeatedly thrashed by the cruel laws of nature in the form of birth, death, old age, and disease. In this way, the conditioned soul becomes a fit candidate to take birth in Kali Yuga, which is the epitome of misfortune. In the Kali Yuga, the living entities who are already suffering so many tribulations mercilessly turn against one another. Human society in Kali Yuga becomes savagely violent, and men open slaughterhouses to butcher hundreds of millions of innocent creatures. Large scale wars are declared, and millions of human beings, even women and children, are quickly annihilated. Unless the key living entity recognizes the authority of the personality of the Godhead, he remains a helpless victim in the clutches of Maya or material illusion. He concocts different solutions to release himself from Maya. But these solutions are themselves creations of Maya and thus cannot possibly release the conditioned soul. In fact, they only intensify his distress. In the next verse, Lord Krishna specifically warns Uddava to avoid Kali Yuga and go back home, back to Godhead. Those of us who have already taken birth in Kali Yuga should also heed this advice and immediately take all necessary steps to go back to Lord's eternal abode for a blissful life of perfect knowledge. The material world is never a happy place, especially during the fearful days of Kali Yuga. My dear Uddava, you should not remain here on the earth once I have abandoned this world. You should not remain here on the earth once I have abandoned this world. My dear devotee, you are sinless, but in Kali Yuga, the people will be addicted to all types of sinful activities. Therefore, do not stay here. In this age of Kali Yuga, human beings are totally unaware that the Supreme Person of Godhead comes personally to the earth to manifest his transcendental pastimes as they are enacted in the spiritual world. Heedless of the authority of the personality of Godhead, the fallen souls of Kali Yuga become engulfed in bitter quarrel and cruelly harass one another. Because people in Kali Yuga are addicted and polluted sinful activities, they are always angry, lusty, and frustrated. In Kali Yuga, the devotees of the personality of the Godhead who are engaged in the ever-increasing loving service of the Lord should never be attracted to living on the earth, the population of which is covered in the darkness of ignorance and devoid of any loving relationship with the Lord. Thus, Lord Krishna advised Uddava not to remain on the earth in Kali Yuga. In fact, in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord advises all living entities that they should never remain anywhere within the material universe during any age. Therefore, every living being should take advantage of the pressures of the Kali Yuga to understand the overall useless nature of the material world and surrender himself at the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Following in footsteps of Sri Uddava, one should surrender to Krishna and go back home, back to Godhead. Now you should completely give up all attachment to your personal friends and relatives and fix your mind on me. And thus, being always conscious of me, you should observe all things with equal vision and wander throughout the earth. Srimad Viraraghava Acharya has explained the concept of equal vision as follows. Samdrik sarvasya brahmottama katavanam shudam rupam samadrishtim. One who is in the path of self-realization should always endeavor to see the ultimate spiritual nature of all existence. The word Mahi in this verse means Paramatmani. Paramatmani. One should fix one's mind on the Supreme Person of Godhead, who is the source of everything. Thus, as the one passes one's life on the earth using up one's allotted time, one should practice seeing all things and all people as a part and parcel of the absolute truth, the personality of Godhead. Since all living entities are part and parcel of Krishna, ultimately they all have the same spiritual status. The material nature, also being an emanation of Krishna, has a similar spiritual status. But although Matter and spirit are both emanations from the personality of Godhead. They do not exist exactly on the same level. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the spirit soul is the superior energy of the Lord, whereas the material nature is his inferior energy. However, since Lord Krishna is equally present in all the things, the word samadrik in this verse indicates that one must ultimately see Krishna within everything and everything within Krishna. Thus, equal vision is compatible with mature knowledge of the varieties present within this world. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakura comments as follows on this verse. At the end of his manifest pastimes in the earth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, thought as follows within his mind. During my pastimes on this earth, I have satisfied the desires of all those devotees who anxiously desire to see me. I have duly married many thousands of queens, headed by Rukmini, whom I personally kidnapped, and have killed innumerable demons in various places and by various means. I have attended meetings, reunions, and ceremonies with many friends, relatives, and well-wishers in the cities such as Vrindavana, Mathura, Dwaraka, Hastinapura, and Mithila, and thus I have kept constantly busy coming and going in the performance of pastimes. I further arranged to give my personal association to great devotees who are situated below the earthly planet. In order to please my mother Devaki and return her 6 deceased sons who were killed by Kamsa, I descended to the planet Sutala and blessed my great devotee Bali Maharaja in order to return the dead son of my spiritual master Sandipani Muni. I personally went to the court of Ravinandana or Yamaraja, and thus he was able to see me face to face. I even blessed the residents of heaven, such as Mother Aditi and Kashyapa Muni, with my personal association when I traveled there to steal the Parijata power for my wife Satyabhama. And in order to please the inhabitants of Mahavishnu abode, such as Nanda, Sunanda, Sudarshana, I traveled to Maha Vaikuntaloka to recover the deceased children of a frustrated Brahmana. Thus, innumerable devotees who ardently desire to see me have received the object of their prayers. Unfortunately, Naranarayana Rishi and the great Paramahamsa sages who live with him in Badrikashrama, although most enthusiastic to see me, never had their desire fulfilled. I have been on the earth for 125 years, and the scheduled time is now up, being busily engaged in my pastimes. I did not have time to give my blessings to those great sages. Nevertheless, Uddava is practically the same as me. He is a great devotee and shares my own transcendental opulences. Thus, he is the right person for me to send to Badrikashrama. I shall give Uddava complete transcendental knowledge by which one becomes detached from the material world, and he in turn can deliver the same knowledge, the science, and this transcending the kingdom of illusion to the worthy sages of Badrikashrama. In this way, he can teach them the method of rendering loving devotional service to my lotus feet. Such loving devotional service rendered to me is the most valuable treasure. And by hearing such knowledge, the desires of the great sages, such as Naranarayana, will be completely fulfilled. Those great souls who have surrendered unto me are always equipped with a transcendental knowledge and detachment from the material world. Sometimes, being busy in their devotional service, they may appear to forget me. However, a pure devotee who has achieved the platform of love for me will always be protected by such sincere devotion. Even if such a devotee should suddenly give up his life while neglecting to fix his mind intensely on me, such a devotee's loving feelings are so powerful that they afford him all protection. Even if there is a temporary moment of forgetfulness, such devotion will bring the devotee to my lotus feet, which are beyond the vision of ordinary materialistic persons. Uddava is my pure devotee. Knowledge of me and detachment from this world have again been aroused in him because he can never give up my association. The sincere servants of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are vigorously enduring to spread the Krishna consciousness movement for the pleasure of their spiritual master, Lord Krishna. At the present time, thousands of devotees in the Krishna consciousness movement in all parts of the world are working long hours under the difficult conditions to distribute transcendental literature and thus enlighten the general population. In this effort, the devotees have no personal motivation but are simply desirous of pleasing their spiritual master. By distributing his books, the people who receive in this effort, the devotees have no personal motivation but are simply desirous of pleasing their spiritual master by distributing his books. The people who receive this literature usually have no previous experience of Krishna consciousness, and they are impressed by the purity of the devotees they meet that they eagerly purchase the books and magazines. In order to execute the tremendous task of spreading Krishna consciousness, the devotees are tirelessly laboring day and night because they are in the platform of loving devotion. Although superficially such busy devotees may occasionally not think directly of the lotus feet of Krishna, such living devotions will undoubtedly take them back to Krishna's lotus feet and being blessed by their service. The Lord himself will again arouse their unflinching meditation upon his personal form. This is the beauty of Bhakti Yoga, and which depends wholly and solely on the mercy of the all merciful personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. This is the only totally safe means uprooting the deep desires for material enjoyment, attaining pure love for Krishna, and giving beyond the material universe to the kingdom of God. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna also advised Uddava in this verse to give up the illusory attachment and so-called friends and family within the material world. One may not be able to physically give up association with family and friends, but one should understand that everyone and everything is a part and parcel of God and is meant for pleasure of God. As soon as one thinks this is my personal family, immediately one will see the material world as no more than a place for enjoying family life. As soon as the one is attached to one's so-called family, false prestige and material possessiveness arise. Actually, everyone is part and parcel of the God, and therefore on the spiritual platform related to all other entities. This is called Krishna Sambandha, or the constitutional relationship with Krishna. It is not possible to advance to the highest stage of spiritual awareness and at the same time maintain petty material concept of society, friendship, and love. One should experience all relations on the higher spiritual platform, Krishna Sambandha, which means seeing everything in relation to Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead. One who is situated in his constitutional relationship with Krishna can see all things in relation to Krishna. He thus gives up the mundane urges of the body, mind, and speech, and travels throughout the earth as a devotee of the Lord. Such a highly reserved personality called Goswami, or the master of the senses. This stage is described in Bhagavad Gita by the words of Brahma Bhuyaya, Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma. On the spiritual platform, one attains complete satisfaction. Yadidam manasa vacha chakshurpyam shravanadibihi nashwaram grihyamanam cha vidchiddhimaya manomayam. My dear Uddava, the material universe that you perceive through your mind, speech, eyes, ears, and other senses is an illusory creation that one imagines to be real due to the influence of Maya. In fact, you should know that all of the objects of material senses are temporary. The question may be raised that since we find good and bad qualities throughout the material world, how can Lord Krishna advise Uddava to see everything equally? In this verse, Krishna explains that material good and evil are a creation of the illusory energy, just as the objects of a dream are a mental creation. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Vasudeva Sarvam Iti, the Lord Krishna is actually everything because he is present within everything and everything is present within him. Krishna is Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, the Lord and proprietor of all the worlds. To see anything separate from Krishna's illusion and attraction to any kind of material illusion, either good or bad, is ultimately unless, since it obliges the living entity to continue wandering in the cycle of birth and death. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching constitute the activities of the 5 knowledge-gathering senses. Similarly, the voice, the hands, the legs, the anus, and the genital constitute the 5 working senses. These 10 senses are organized around the mind, which is the center of material activity. When the living entity desires to exploit matter, he is covered by the 3 modes of nature. Thus he concords different philosophical, political, and social explanations of reality, but never understands the absolute truth, Lord Krishna, who is beyond the contaminated perception of the material senses. One who is entangled in the network of material designations such as race, nationality, sectarian religion, political affiliation. One whose consciousness is bewildered by illusion perceives many differences in value and meaning among material objects. Thus, one engages constantly on the platform of material good and evil and is bound by such conceptions. Absorbed in material duality, such a person contemplates the performance of compulsory duties, non-performance of such duties, and performance of forbidden activities. The illusory mental platform of existence is described in this verse. The word ayakshutasya indicates conditioned soul who does not fix his mind on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is clearly described in Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literature that Lord Krishna, the absolute truth, is within everything and everything is within this Lord. The example may be given that when a woman loves a man, she is most eager to see him and she daily sees him dressed in different clothes. Actually, the woman is interested not in the clothes but in the man. Similarly, within every material object is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, one who has developed love of God is constantly seeing the Lord everywhere and not just the superficial material objects that cover the Lord. The word ayuksatya in this verse indicates that one who has not come to the stage of reality. Such a person, being deprived of loving devotional service to Lord Krishna, attempts to enjoy the innumerable forms and flavors of material experience. This temporary illusory engagement is not the constitutional function of the bewildered living entity, who remains without any awareness of the ultimate reality. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, within the world of matter, there are undoubtedly varieties. Among dogs, there are pedigree poodles and common mutts, and among horses, there are thoroughbreds and old grey mares. Similarly, some human beings are beautiful and educated, others are dull and homely. Some are rich and some are poor. In nature, we find fertile land and sterile land, lush forests and useless deserts, invaluable gems and colorless stones, flowing transparent rivers and stagnant dirty ponds. In human society, we find happiness and distress, love and hate, victory and defeat, war and peace, life and death, and so on. However, we do not have any permanent relationship with any of these conditions because we are eternal spirit souls, part and parcel of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vedic literature, Vedic culture is arranged in such a way that everyone can become perfect in self-realization simply by performing his occupational duty for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. Some conditioned souls, however, believe that complete perfection in the life may be achieved by performing ordinary non-spiritual duties on behalf of the family, nation, humanity, and so on. Others are interested in neither service to God nor noble mundane activities, and there are others who actively pursue sinful life. Such sinful persons generally rise from bed late in the afternoon and stay awake all night, taking intoxicants and engaging in illicit sex. Such a dark, hellish existence is caused by the attraction to tamoguna, the mode of ignorance. Actions in the mode of ignorance are called vikarma. The actions in the mode of ignorance are called vikarma, as mentioned in this verse. Unfortunately, neither the materially responsible person, nor the materially irresponsible person, nor the sinful person can achieve the real perfection of life, Krishna consciousness life. Although different societies and different individuals maintain a different concepts of God and evil, all material things are ultimately useless in terms of our eternal self-interest, which is Krishna consciousness. This idea is expressed by saintly King Chitraketu and the sixth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam also. Therefore, bringing all your senses under control and thus subduing the mind, you should see the entire world as situated within the self, who is expanded everywhere. And you should also see this individual self within me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Being fully endowed with a conclusive knowledge of the Vedas and having realized the ultimate purpose of such knowledge in practice, you will be able to perceive the pure self, and thus your mind will be satisfied. At that time, you will become dear to all living beings, headed by the other gods, and you will never be hampered by any disturbances in the life. One who has transcended material good and evil automatically acts in accordance with the religious injunctions and avoids forbidden activities. The self-realized person does this spontaneously like an innocent child and not because he is thinking in terms of material good or evil. One who has developed transcendental knowledge never acts whimsically. Srila Rupa Goswami describes two stages of devotion service: sadhana bhakti and raganuga bhakti. Raganuga bhakti is the stage of spontaneous love of Godhead, whereas sadhana bhakti means the conscientious practice of the regulative principles of devotional service. In most cases, one who is now enjoying transcendental consciousness has rigidly practiced the rules and regulations of devotional service. Thus, due to the previous practice, one spontaneously avoids sinful life and acts in most cases, one who is now enjoying the transcendental consciousness has rigidly practiced the rules and regulations of devotional service. Thus, due to the previous practice, one spontaneously avoids sinful life and acts in accordance with the standards of ordinary piety. This does not mean that a self-realized soul is consciously avoiding sin and pursuing piety. Rather, due to his self-realized nature, he spontaneously engages in the most exalted spiritual activities, just as an innocent child may spontaneously exhibit good qualities such as kindness, tolerance, and so on. The spiritual platform is called Shuddha Sattva. The spiritual platform is called Shuddha Tattva. Shuddha Sattva. Sattvika, Sattva Guna, full of Sattva Guna. Shuddha Sattva is still higher, or purified goodness, to distinguish it from the material mode of goodness, which is always to some extent polluted by the lower modes of passion and ignorance. Sattvika guna also, to some extent, polluted by the mixture of the Rajasika guna and Tamasika guna. But when you reach Shuddha Sattva, then you are not going to be attached to any modes of passion and ignorance. Thus, if a man in material goodness appears to be most pious in the eyes of the world, thus, if a man in material goodness appears to be most pious in the eyes of the world, we can only imagine the spotless character of a self-realized soul in purified spiritual goodness. Therefore, it is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, if one is a pure devotee of Lord Krishna, he will automatically exhibit all the exalted qualities of the gods. Such manifestation of purity is spontaneous as explained in this verse. Sarvabhuta suruchanto jnana vijnana nischayah pashannadatmakam vishvam na vipadyeti vaipunaha. One who is the kind well-wisher of all living beings, who is peaceful and firmly fixed in knowledge and realization, sees me within all things. Such a person never again falls down into the cycle of birth and death. Shukavacha ityadistu bhagavata mahabhagavato nrupa uddavaha pranita pranipatyaha tattva jijnasuracchatam. Sri Shukadeva Goswami said, O king, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, thus instructed his pure devotee of Uddava, who was eager to receive knowledge from the Lord. Uddava then offered obeisances to the Lord and spoke as follows. Uddava is described here as Tattvam Jijnasuhu, or desiring to know the truth. It is clear from previous verses that Sri Uddava is a pure devotee of Lord Krishna and that he considers devotional service to Lord Krishna to be the perfection of life. Thus, the words Tattvam Jijnashu indicate that since Lord Krishna is about to leave the earth, Uddava is most anxious to deepen his understanding of the Lord so that he may further advance in loving service to Lord's lotus feet. Unlike an ordinary philosopher or a scholar, a pure devotee is not eager to acquire knowledge for personal gratification. Uddava vacha yogesha yoga vinyasa yogatman yoga sambhavaha nishreyasaya me prokshastvagaha sannyasa lakshanaha. Uddava said, my dear Lord, you alone award the results of yoga practice, and you are so kind that by your own influence you distribute the perfection of yoga to your devotee. Thus, you are the supreme soul who is realized through yoga, and it is you who are the origin of all mystic power. For my supreme benefit, you have explained the procedure for giving up the material world through the process of sannyasa or renunciation. The word yogesha here indicates that Supreme Personality of Godhead awards the results of all yoga practices. Since all the material and spiritual worlds emanate from the transcendental body of Krishna, there is nothing to be achieved by any yoga process except Krishna and his potencies. And since the Lord remains eternally the master of his potencies, no one can achieve anything through yoga or any other spiritual or material process except by the sanction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The word yoga means linking up, and unless we link ourselves with the absolute truth, we remain covered by the darkness of ignorance. Thus, Krishna is the local goal of yoga. Since we are linking ourselves to temporary objects of relationship are temporary, the results are temporary. And the time of the death, we become bewildered when all of the connections are suddenly cut off by Maya. If we link ourselves to Krishna, however, our relationship with him will continue even after death. Hello? Since we are linking ourselves to temporary objects, the relationships are temporary. The results are temporary. At the time of the death, we become bewildered when all of our connections are suddenly cut off by the Maya. If we link ourselves to Krishna, however, our relationship with him will continue even after death. As explained in Bhagavad Gita, the relationship with Krishna that we develop in this life will continue to increase in our next life until we achieve the supreme goal of entering Krishna's planet. Those who are sincerely serve the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, following the transcendental lifestyle prescribed by Lord Krishna, will enter the Lord's abode at the end of this lifetime. One can never achieve a permanent situation by mental speculation, and what to speak of by ordinary material sense gratification. By the methods of Hatha Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga, etc., one does not actually awaken his propensity for rendering eternal loving service. Hello? 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 Who's speaking? Oh, hello, Ambu. What can I do? I'm in the middle of YouTube pravachana. I'm talking in the YouTube. I'll talk to you later after 2 hours. Okay? Finishes in about an hour's time. You can watch me in YouTube if you want. Just write my name, Ramakrishnagupta Mudalagiri, in the YouTube search button, and you will see me talking there. Okay, thank you. It's very interesting. Uddava teachings to Uddava, Krishna teachings to Uddava, I'm talking. Thank you. One can never achieve a permanent situation by mental speculation, and what to speak of by ordinary material sense gratification. By the methods of Hatha Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga, etc., one does not actually awaken his propensity for rendering eternal loving service to the personality of Godhead. Thus, one is bereft of the transcendental taste of spiritual enjoyment. Sometimes the conditioned soul, disgusted by his failure to gratify his senses, bitterly decides to renounce the material world and merge into an impersonal, painless transcendence. But our actual happy situation is to render loving service at the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead. All of the different yoga processes gradually lead one to love of Godhead, and it is Lord Krishna's aim to re-establish the conditioned souls in this happy position. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is making this perfection easily available through the chanting of the holy name of Krishna, the supreme yoga process for this age. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu propagated Hare Rama, Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. This will lead on to the Bhakti Yoga and eternal happiness for the devotees. Tyagoyam dushtaro bhuman kamanam vishyatmabhihi sutaram tvayi tharvatmanna bhakteriti me matihi. My dear Lord, supreme soul, for those whose minds are attached to sense gratification, and especially for those bereft of devotion unto you, such renunciation of material enjoyment is most difficult to perform. That is my opinion. Uddava says like that. Those who are truly devoted to the Supreme Lord do not accept anything for their personal gratification, but rather accept those things suitable to be offered in the Lord's loving service. The word Vishyatmabhi indicates that those who desire material objects for their personal gratification instead of for the devotional service of the Lord, the minds of such materialistic persons are suitably disturbed, and it is virtually impossible for such persons to renounce material enjoyment. This is the opinion of Sri Uddava. O my Lord, I myself am most foolish because of my consciousness is merged in the material body and bodily relations, which are all manufactured by your illusory energy. Thus, I am thinking, I am this body, and all of these relatives are mine. Therefore, my Lord, please instruct your poor servant. Please tell me how I can very easily carry out your instructions. It's very difficult to give up false identification within the material body, and thus we remain attached to our so-called bodily relations such as wife, children, friends, and so on. Bodily attachment causes intense pain within the heart, and we are stunned by lamentation and hankering. Sri Uddava, a pure devotee of the Lord, here speaks like an ordinary person, showing how to pray to personality of Godhead. We practically see that many sinful persons enter the international city of Krishna consciousness and after preliminary purification become most repentant for their previous illicit activities. They are shocked when they realize how they give up the personal association of God to pursue the useless forms of created by Maya. Therefore, they wholeheartedly pray to the spiritual master and Lord Krishna to be engaged eternally in transcendental devotion service. Such a repentant, eager mentality is most auspicious of spiritual advancement. The Lord certainly answers the prayers of a repentant devotee desperate to escape the clutches of the illusion. My dear Lord, you are the absolute truth, the supreme personality of Godhead, and you reveal yourself to your devotees. Besides your Lordship, I do not see anyone who can actually explain perfect knowledge to me. Such a perfect teacher is not to be found even among the gods in heaven. Indeed, all of the gods in the heaven, headed by Lord Brahma, are bewildered by your illusory potency. They are conditioned souls who accept their own material bodies and bodily expansions to be the highest truth. Therefore, O Lord, feeling weary of material life and tormented by its distresses, I now surrender unto you because you are the perfect master. You are the unlimited, all-knowing Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose spiritual abode is Vaikuntha, is free from all disturbances. In fact, you are known as Narayana, the true friend of all living beings. No one can claim to be self-made man because everyone works with the body and mind awarded by material nature. By the laws of nature, there is always anxiety in material existence, and terrible tragedies periodically harass the conditioned souls. Here, Uddava points out that only Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, is a proper master, friend, and shelter for the conditioned souls. We may be attracted by the good qualities of particular man or demigod, but we may later discover discrepancies in that person's behavior. Therefore, Krishna is described as Anavadhyam. There are no discrepancies in the personal conduct or character of the personality of Godhead. He is eternally faultless. We may faithfully serve a master, father, or a god, but when it is time for us to receive our reward for faithful service, the master may die. Therefore, Lord Krishna is here described as Ananta Param. Ananta Param indicates that he is not limited by time or space. The word Anta indicates the termination of time. Para indicates the spatial termination. Therefore, Ananta Param means that Lord Krishna is not limited by time or space and thus will always dutifully reward his faithful servants. Lord Krishna says to Uddava, generally those human beings who can expertly analyze the actual situation of the material world are able to raise themselves beyond the inauspicious life of gross material gratification. Sri Uddava expressed to the Lord in the previous verses his fallen condition and his entanglement in the material concept of life. Now Lord Krishna reassures Uddava that even persons far less qualified than Uddava are able to extricate themselves from the inauspicious life of material sense gratification. According to Sridhara Swami, even if one has not received the instruction of bona fide spiritual master, one can understand by direct or indirect analysis that the material world is not a place not a place of enjoyment. Direct analysis means one's personal experience, and indirect analysis means hearing and reading of the experience of others. An intelligent person, expert in perceiving the world around him and in applying sound logic, can achieve real benefit through his own intelligence. Thus, sometimes one acts as one's own instructing spiritual master. As illustrated in this chapter by the conversation between the king Yadhu and the Avadhutha, a sensitive, reasonable person can acquire real knowledge and happiness simply by carefully observing the world around him. By observing the happiness and distress of other living entities, one can understand what is beneficial and what is destructive. In the human form of life, those who are self-controlled and expert in the spiritual science of Sankhya can directly see me along with all my potencies. Lord Krishna says, in the human form of life, those who are self-controlled and expert in spiritual science of Sankhya can directly see Lord Krishna along with all his potencies. We found that the following statement in the Vedas: in the human form of life, the soul is fully endowed with intelligence to understand spiritual knowledge. Thus, in human life, the soul may speak realized knowledge, see the truth, know the future, and also understand the reality both of this world and of the next. Taking advantage of the experiences of mortal life, the soul in the human form may endure for immortality, and the human body is fully equipped to achieve this end. In this world, there are many kinds of created bodies, some with one leg, others with 2, 3, 4, and more legs, and still others with no legs. But of all these, the human form is actually dear to me. Lord Krishna says, human form is actually dear to him. The ultimate purpose of material creation is to facilitate the return of the conditioned souls back to home, back to Godhead, to Vaikuntha. Since this redemption of the conditioned souls is especially possible only in the human form of life, naturally this form is particularly dear to the compassionate personality of Godhead. Although I, the Supreme Lord, can never be captured by ordinary sense perception, Lord Krishna says, although I, the Supreme Lord, can never be captured by ordinary sense perception, those situated in human life may use their intelligence and other faculties of perception or to directly search for me through both apparent and indirectly ascertained symptoms. In this regard, sages cites a historical narration concerning the conversation between the greatly powerful king Yadhu and an Avadhutha. So there is a conversation between the king Yadhu and Avadhutha. Lord Krishna will narrate this story to show Uddava how rational intelligence can be utilized in Bhakti Yoga to acquire Vedic knowledge, and how ultimately an intelligent person will come to the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Maharaja Yadhu once observed a certain Brahmana, Avadhutha, who appeared to be quite young and learned, wandering about fearlessly. Being himself most learned in spiritual science, the king took the opportunity and inquired from him as follows. Yadhu king is asking, "O Brahmana, I see that you are not engaged in any practical religious activity, and yet you have acquired a most expert understanding of all things and all people within this world. Kindly tell me, sir, how did you acquire this extraordinary intelligence, and why are you traveling freely throughout the world, behaving as if you were a child?" Generally, human beings work hard to cultivate religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and also knowledge of the soul, and their usual motive is to increase the duration of their lives, acquire fame, and enjoy material opulence. You, however, although capable of learned, expert, handsome, and most eloquent, are not engaged in doing anything nor do you desire anything, rather you appear stupefied and maddened as if you were a ghostly creature. Ignorant persons often think that renowned spiritual life is meant for those who are of important or homely or incompetent in practical worldly affairs. Sometimes foolish people say that religious life is a crutch for those who are not expert enough to achieve high status in the society. Therefore, King Yadhu has described the qualities of the mendicant Brahmana in order to show that the Brahmana has taken to renounce the spiritual life in spite of the great potential for worldly success. The Avadhutha Brahmana is described as being expert, learned, good looking, eloquent, and in every sense qualified to be a great material success. Still, the Avadhuta has renounced material life and taken to Krishna consciousness. Going back home, back to Godhead, for an eternal life of bliss and knowledge is the real work of a human being. The followers of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu simultaneously cultivate their own Krishna consciousness and strenuously endure in missionary work to help others become to follow Krishna consciousness. Often, foolish persons denied the devotees of saying, "Why don't you get a job?" They think that one who is sincerely enduring for spiritual enlightenment and who is also enlightening others is not doing anything practical. Foolish materialists will pay millions of dollars to extend their lives by a few weeks or months in a hospital, but they do not appreciate someone enduring for eternal life. There is no actual logic in the material life. The act of trying to enjoy without Krishna is in itself is the culmination of irrationality, and thus we cannot expect to find anything ultimately rational or logical in a materialistic life devoid of Krishna consciousness. Many devotees of Krishna come from wealthy, learned, and influential families, and they take to Krishna consciousness in order to perfect their lives, and certainly not due to lack of opportunity for material advancement. Although sometimes persons in material distress approach the Supreme Lord or help in material life, a real devotee of Lord Krishna voluntarily gives up all types of material enjoyment, knowing that nothing but love of Krishna and service to his holy fetus are the actual perfection of life. Although all people within the material world are burning in the great forest fire of lust and greed, you remain free and are not burned by that fire. You are just like an elephant who takes shelter from the forest fire by standing within the water of the Ganga river. The natural result of transcendental bliss is described in this verse. The young Brahmana was physically very attractive and his senses were full of potency for material enjoyment, yet he was not at all affected by material lust. This position is called liberation or bhukti. O Brahmana, we see that you are devoid of any contact with material enjoyment and that you are traveling alone without any companions or family members. Therefore, because we are sincerely inquiring from you, please tell us the cause of the great ecstasy that you are feeling within yourself. The word Kevalatmanaha is significant here. Unless one has a practical realization of Supreme Soul and the individual soul who reside together within the heart of every living being, it is very difficult to artificially adopt the sannyasa order of life and travel without the association of wife, children, or other family members. The nature of every living being is to make friends with others and to offer his love to suitable person. One who has realized the Supreme Person is satisfied to always carry the personality of Godhead within his heart as his constant companion. Unless one has realized that Krishna is one's only true friend and that Krishna is within one's heart, one will remain attached to the temporary relationship of the material world. Lord Krishna continued, the intelligent king Yadhu, always respectful to the Brahmanas, waited with bowed head as the Brahmana priest with king's attitude began to reply. Brahmana Vacha. Santi me guruvo rajan bahuo buddha paschitaha yato buddhi upadaya mukto tomiha tan shunum. The Brahmana said, "My dear king, with my intelligence I have taken shelter of many spiritual masters. Having gained transcendental understanding from them, I now wander about the earth in a liberated condition. Please listen as I describe them to you. O king, I have taken shelter of 24 gurus, who are the following. Number one is earth, air, sky, water, fire, moon, sun, pigeon, and python. The sea, moth, honeybee, elephant, and honey thief, the deer, the fish, the prostitute, pingala, the kurora bird, and the child, and the young girl, arrow maker, serpent, spider, and wasp. My dear king, by studying their activities, I have learned the science of the self. The wasp is known as Supeshakrita because it causes the insect that it kills to take a beautiful form in the next life. The wasp is known as Supeshakrita because it causes the insect that it kills to take a beautiful form in the next life. Please listen, O son of Maharaja Yati, O tiger among the men, as I explain to you what I have learned from each of these gurus. A sober person, even when harassed by other living beings, should understand that his aggressors are acting helplessly under the control of God, and thus he should never be distracted from the progress on his own path. This rule I have learned from the earth. The earth is the symbol of tolerance. By deep oil drilling, atomic explosions, pollution, and so on, the earth is constantly harassed by demonic living entities. Sometimes lush forests are cut down by greedy men with commercial interest, and thus a wasteland is created. Sometimes the earth's surface is soaked by the blood of soldiers fighting in savage warfare. Yet, despite all these disturbances, the earth continues to provide all the necessities of the living beings. In this way, one may learn the art of tolerance by studying the earth. Earth is tolerant, known for tolerance. A saintly person should learn from the mountain to devote all his efforts to the service of others and to make the welfare of others the sole reason for his existence. Similarly, as the disciple of the tree, he should learn to dedicate himself for the other's benefit. A learned sage should take his satisfaction in the simple maintenance of his existence and should not seek satisfaction through gratifying the material senses. In other words, one should care for the material body in such a way that one's higher knowledge is not destroyed, and so that one's speech and mind are not deviated from the self-realization. Even transcendentalist is surrounded by an innumerable material objects which possesses good and bad qualities. However, one who has transcended material good and evil should not become entangled even when in contact with the material objects. Rather, he should act like a wind. The wind is the external manifestation of air, whereas prana is the internal manifestation. When the wind passes over the waterfalls, it carries sprinkles of clear water and thus becomes most refreshing. Sometimes the wind blows through the beautiful forest, carrying the fragrances of fruits and flowers. At other times, the wind may feel a fire that burns the same forest to ashes. The wind, however, being fixed in its own nature, remains neutral in both its auspicious and inauspicious activities. Similarly, within this material world, we will inevitably face both pleasing and disgusting situations. If, however, we remain fixed in Krishna consciousness, we will not be disturbed by the inauspiciousness, nor will we become attached to the materially auspicious. In the course of his spiritual duties, a devotee sometimes finds himself chanting Hare Krishna mantra. in a beautiful country atmosphere. And sometimes he finds himself doing the same thing in a hellish city. Although a self-realized soul may live in various material bodies while in this world experiencing their various qualities and functions, he is never entangled, just as the wind, which carries various aromas, does not actually mix with them. A thoughtful sage, even while living within the material body, should understand himself to be pure spirit soul. Similarly, one should see that the spirit soul enters within all forms of life, both moving and non-moving, and that the individual souls are thus all-pervading. The sage should further observe that the Supreme Personality regarded as the super soul is simultaneously present within all things, both the individual soul and super soul, or can be understood by comparing them to the nature of the sky. Although the sky extends everywhere and everything rests within the sky does not mix with anything, nor can it be divided by anything. Although air exists in the sky or a space is different from air. Even the absence of air, space, or sky is present. All material objects associated in this space are within the vast material sky, but the sky remains undivided, and although accommodating all objects, never actually mixes with them anything. In the same way, one can understand the situation of both the individual soul and the super soul. The individual soul is all-pervading because there is innumerable jivatmas which enter within all things. Yet, as confirmed in Vedic literature, each individual atma remains infinitesimal. The Shvetattara Upanishad says also something similar. When the upper part of the hair is divided into 100 parts, and again each of such parts is further divided into 100 parts, each such part is the measurement of the dimension of the spirit soul. The same is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam. There are innumerable particles of spiritual atoms which are measured as 1/10,000th of upper portion of the hair. The Supreme Personality Godhead, however, is all-pervading because he himself personally present everywhere. The Lord is known as Advaita, or indivisible. Thus, the same unequal personality of Godhead exists everywhere, just like the sky. Although the mighty wind blows clouds and storms across the sky is never implicated or affected by these activities. Similarly, the spirit soul is not actually changed or affected by contact with the material nature. Although the living entity enters within a body made of earth, water, and fire, and although he is impelled by the three modes of nature created the eternal time, his eternal spiritual nature is never actually affected. O king, saintly person is just like water because he is free from all contamination, gentle by nature, and by speaking creates a beautiful vibration like that of a flowing water. Just by seeing, touching, or hearing such a saintly person, the living entity is purified. Just as one is cleansed by contact with pure water, thus the saintly person, just like a holy place, purifies all those who contact him because he always chants the glories of the Lord. Saintly persons become powerful by execution of austerities. Their consciousness is unshakable because they do not try to enjoy anything within the material world. Such naturally liberated sages accept foodstuffs that are offered to them by destiny, and if by chance they happen to eat contaminated food, they are not affected, just like fire which burns up contaminated substances that are offered to eat. The word Udara Bhajana indicates that saintly persons eats only to keep body and soul together and not for sense gratification. One should eat palatable foodstuffs to maintain one's mind in cheerful mood. However, one should not eat luxuriously because this will cause sex desire and laziness. A saintly person is always perfect gentleman and is never greedy or lusty. Although Maya tries to defeat him by offering different material allurements, ultimately these attractive material features are themselves defeated by the spiritual power of a saintly person. Thus, one should never disrespect. Thus, one should never disrespect a spiritually advanced personality, but should worship him never reverentially. To carelessly approach a Krishna conscious person is just like a carelessly approaching fire, which immediately burns if not handled properly. The Lord does not excuse mistreatment of pure devotee. A saintly person, just like a fire, sometimes appears in concealed form and at other times reveals himself for the welfare of the conditioned souls who desire real happiness. A saintly person may accept the worshipable position of the spiritual master, and thus, like fire, he burns to ashes all the past and future sinful reactions of his worshippers by merciful accepting their offerings. A saintly person, just like fire, sometimes appears in a concealed form and at other times reveals himself for the welfare of the conditioned souls who desire real happiness. A saintly person may accept the worshipable position of spiritual master, and thus, like fire, he burns to ashes all the past and future sinful reactions of his worshippers by mercifully accepting their offerings. Just as fire manifests differently in pieces of wood of different seasons and qualities, the omnipotent Supreme Soul, having entered the bodies of higher and lower life forms created by his own potency, appears to assume the identity of each. The various phases of one's material life, beginning with birth and culminating in death, are all properties of the body and do not affect the soul. Just as the apparent waxing and waning of the moon does not affect the moon itself, such changes are enforced by the imperceptible movements of time. The flames of a fire appear and disappear at every moment, and at this creation and destruction is not noticed by the ordinary observer. Similarly, the mighty waves of time flow constantly like the powerful currents of a river and imperceptibly cause the birth, growth, and the death of innumerable material bodies. And yet the soul, who is thus constantly forced to change his position, cannot perceive the actions of a time. The Brahmana Avadhutha, instructing the king Yadhu, again gives the example of a fire after having already proceeded to the example of the moon. This analytic method is called Simhavalokana, or the lion's glance, by which one simultaneously proceeds forward and casts backward glances to see if anything has been overlooked. That's called Simhavalokana. Thus the sage proceeds with his analysis but returns to the example of fire to illustrate the need for renunciation. The material body is certainly an ephemeral and phantasmagorical manifestation of the Lord's external potency. The flames of a fire constantly take birth and disappear, and we perceive the fire as a continuous reality. Similarly, the soul is a continuous reality, although his material bodies appear and disappear constantly. By the influence of time, it is said that the most astonishing thing is that no one thinks that they will die, because the soul is eternal. The living entity is prone to accept any fleeting situation as permanent, forgetting that his eternal nature can be truly experienced only in the eternal atmosphere of the spiritual sky. If one is convinced of this fact, he develops the quality of vairagya, or detachment from material illusion. Just as the sun evaporates large quantities of water by its potent rays and later returns the water to the earth in the form of rain. Just as the sun evaporates the large quantities of water by its potent rays and later returns the water to the earth in the form of rain, similarly, a saintly person accepts all types of material objects with his material senses, and at the appropriate time, when the proper person has approached him to request them, he returns such material objects. Thus, both in accepting and giving up the objects of the senses, he is not entangled. Even when reflected in various objects, the sun is never divided, nor does it merge into its reflection. Only those with dull brains would consider the sun is this way. Similarly, although the soul is reflected through different material bodies, the soul remains undivided and non-material. The sun is reflected in many objects, such as windows, mirrors, shiny metal, oil, water, and so on. And the sun remains one and indivisible. Similarly, the eternal spirit of soul within the body is reflected through the screen of the material body. Thus, the soul appears to be old or young, fat or skinny, happy or sad. The soul may appear. The soul may appear to be American or Russian, African, Hindu, or Christian. However, the eternal soul in its natural position is free of any material designation. The word stula matibhi in this verse indicates those whose intelligence is gross and dull. We have practical experience of a dog urinating on a valuable painting at an outdoor art show. Due to its dull intelligence, the dog could not appreciate the actual value of the painting. Similarly, unless one takes to Krishna consciousness, one is grossly misusing the invaluable opportunity of this human life. Human life is meant for self-realization, and we should not waste time bickering over material designations such as capitalist, communist, American, Russian, and so on. Instead, all people should take to the shelter one should understand the sun by observing its direct manifestation, not its distorted reflection on material objects. Similarly, one should consider every living being in terms of his pure spiritual identity beyond the distorted manifestation of material designation. The word Atma in this verse also refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just as we tend to observe ordinary jiva, souls, through the reflection of the material body, we tend to observe the personality of Godhead through the distorting screen of our material mind. Thus, we imagine God to be impersonal or material or unknowable when the sky is overcast. The highest possible perception of the sun, which is covered by clouds. Similarly, when one's mind is fogged over the mental speculation, one may take the light emanating from the transcendental body of the God to be the highest spiritual truth. However, when the mind is spotlessly clear, like a cloudless blue sky, one can see the actual form of the personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. The absolute truth cannot be perfectly understood by the covered mind of the conditioned soul. One should never indulge in excessive affection or concern for anyone or anything. Otherwise, one will have to experience great suffering, just like the foolish pigeon. There once was a pigeon who lived in the forest along with his wife. He had built a nest within the tree and lived there for several years in her company. The two pigeons were very much devoted to their household duties, their hearts being tied together by sentimental affection. They were each attracted by the other's glances, bodily features, and states of mind. Thus, they completely bound each other in affection. The male and a female pigeon were so attracted to each other and that they could not tolerate even a moment's life separation from one another. This is called Bhagavad Vismruti, or forgetfulness of the Supreme Lord and attachment to dead matter. The living entity has an eternal love for their Lord, but when perverted, that love is manifested as false material affection. A pale reflection of actual pleasure thus becomes the foundation of a false life based on forgetfulness of the absolute truth. Naively trusting in the future, they carried out their acts of resting, sitting, walking, standing, conversing, playing, eating, and so forth, as a loving couple among the trees of the forest. Whenever she desired anything, O king, the she pigeon would flatteringly cajole her husband, and he in turn would gratify her by faithfully doing whatever she wanted, even with great personal difficulty. Thus, he could not control his senses in her association. The word Tarpayanti indicates the lady pigeon was quite expert in seducing her husband through smiling glances and loving talks. Thus, appealing to his noble sentiments, she efficiently engaged him as her faithful servant. The poor pigeon was Achitendriya, or one who cannot control his senses and whose heart is easily melted by the beauty of a woman. The Brahmana Avadhutha is giving a valuable instructions by narrating the story of the two pigeons and the terrible distress they suffer by inevitable separation. If one's intelligence is not dedicated to serving Krishikesha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, of sense activity, undoubtedly one will plunge into the nescience of bodily gratification. Then one becomes no better than a foolish pigeon. Then the female pigeon experienced her first pregnancy. When the time arrived, the chaste lady delivered a number of eggs within the nest in the presence of her husband. When the time was ripe, baby pigeons with tender limbs and feathers, created by the inconceivable potencies of the Lord, were born of these eggs. The two pigeons became most affectionate to each other, their children, and took great pleasure in listening to their awkward chirping, which sounded very sweet to the parents. Thus, with love, they began to raise the little birds who were born of them. The parent birds became very joyful by observing the soft wings of their children, their chirping, their lovely innocent movements around the nest, and their attempts to jump up and fly. Seeing their children happy, the parents were also happy. Their hearts bound to each other by affection, the foolish birds, completely bewildered by the illusory energy of Lord Vishnu, continued to take care of the young offspring who had been born to them. One day, the two heads of the family went out to find food for the children. Being very anxious to feed their offspring properly, they wandered all over the forest for a long time. At that time, a certain hunter who happened to be wandering through the forest saw the young pigeons moving about near their nest. Spreading out his net, he captured them all. The pigeon and his wife were always anxious for the maintenance of their children, and they were wandering in the forest for that purpose. Having obtained proper food, they now returned to their nest. When the lady pigeon caught sight of her own children trapped within the hunter's net, she was overwhelmed with anguish, and crying out, she rushed toward them as they cried out to her in return. The lady pigeon had always allowed herself to be bound by the ropes of this intense material affection, and thus her mind was overwhelmed by anguish. Being in the grip of illusory energy of the Lord, she completely forgot herself, and rushing forward to her helpless children, she was immediately bound in the hunter's net. She was immediately bound in the hunter's net. Seeing his own children who were more dear to him than life itself, fatally bound in the hunter's net, along with his dearmost wife, whom he considered equal in every way to himself. The poor male pigeon began to lament wretchedly. The male pigeon said, "Alas, just see how I am now destroyed. I am obviously a great fool, for I did not properly execute pious activities. I could not satisfy myself, nor could I fulfill the purpose of life. My dear family, which was the basis of my religiosity, economic development, and sense gratification, is now hopelessly ruined." Srila Sridhara Swami explains that the word atrapsa indicates that the pigeon was not satisfied with the sense gratification he had achieved. Although he was completely attached to his wife, children, and nest, he could not sufficiently enjoy them, since there is ultimately no satisfaction in such things. Akrutasya indicates that his hopes and dreams for future expansion of his sense gratification were now also ruined. People commonly refer to their home, sweet home, as their nest, and many put aside for future sense gratification is called nest egg. Therefore, all the lovebirds of the material world should clearly note how their so-called wife, children, and fortune will all be dragged away in the hunter's net. In other words, death will finish everything. My wife and I were an ideal match. She always faithfully obeyed me and in fact accepted me as a worshipable deity. But now, seeing her children lost and her home empty, she was left me behind and gone to heaven with our saintly children. Now I am a wretched person living in an empty home. My wife is dead. My children are dead. Why should I possibly want to live? My heart is so pained by separation from my family that life itself has become simply suffering. As the father pigeon wretchedly stared at his poor children trapped in the net and on the verge of the death, pathetically struggling to free themselves, his mind went blank, and thus he himself fell into the hunter's net. The cruel hunter, having fulfilled his desire by capturing the head pigeon, his wife, and all of their children, set off for his own home. In this way, one who is too attached to family life becomes disturbed at heart. Like the pigeon, he tries to find pleasure in mundane sex attraction, busily engaged in maintaining his own family. The misery person is fated to suffer greatly along with all his family members. The doors of liberation are opened wide to one who has achieved human life. But if a human being simply devotes himself to family life, like the foolish bird in this story, then he is to be considered as one who has climbed to a high place only to trip and fall down again. Thus end the purports of the humble servants of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Vedanta Swami Prabhupada to the 11th canto, 7th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Lord Krishna Instructs Uddava. In the 8th chapter, the story of Pingala comes, and Lord Krishna continues to teach Uddava how the Avadhutha Brahmana explained to Maharaja Yadhu and instructions he had received from 9 of his gurus, beginning with the Python. Om Namostu Anantaya Sahasramurtaye Sahasrapadakshara Sahasranamne Purushashre Sahasrakoti Yugadarane Namaha Sahasrakoti Yugadarane Namaha Akashat Paritam Medagat Sagaram Sarvadeva Namaskaraha Srikesham Priyatyono Namaha Sarva Vedeshat Punyam Sarva Tirtesh Yatpalam Tatpalam Pramapnivasana Dvasnevasya Vashtante Trem Sarvaputri Vasosi Vasnevam Nustevamna Kayena Vacha Manasendreva Buddhatmanama Vurdesabhavat Karomi Yaddat Sagalam Parasmai Narayana iti samarpayami Narayana iti samarpayami. Om Keshwaya.